I go by the name Sotadeology. In today's particular live session, I'm going to share with us something so profound. So, we're going to actually dissect the mystery of information. We're going to see how information is related, to the fabrics of the universe. So, this particular video is going to be quite insightful. It's really going to be quite insightful, and then you're going to enjoy this video. Now, if you have been following my video, my live session, then you know that I've been, unravel. I've been unraveling the mystery of the universe. You understand? So now, this is going to be another video which I'm going to call, it's going to be part of Sotadeology lecture series, and this particular one is going to be Sotadeology lecture 28. So this is going to be Sotadeology lecture 28. And so I title it the vertical and horizontal quantum entanglement as information structure of the universe. That is the title of this particular video. Now, with that topic, you yourself can see that the topic is mind-provoking one. You understand? So I want you to sit back, relax, to enjoy what I have actually prepared for you today. So now, when you look at the diagram that we have right here, that is the time energy wave model. You are so conversant with that. So basically, by applying formula of everything, we are able to actually have this vertical trajectory, which I call static and undulating field. It's a field of reality where we're able to get, we get right from classical level through to quantum, through quantum mechanics, then to complex level. That is the whole thing. So now I'm not going to waste time on this time energy wave model. If you really want to know more about it, you can actually watch my Sotadeology lecture series. You understand, and you'll be able to understand it quite all right. But I'm going to actually, you know, uh, I'm going to drag your attention to the vertical line at the middle, which is this particular, and right there, what can you see? You see that we have vertical entanglement. So what we have there is vertical entanglement. So basically, the entanglement that we have, we really have it at the quantum level. So now, right from where we have this quantum arbitrary suspension, and then the compacted equilateral triangle, which is what I call quantum nucleus. That is where we have undefined electron. Now the electron is not defined until we're connected to higher dimension, where the electron of that higher dimension is being instantly flipped to positron, or being instantly converted to positron. And so the moment we have positron, then the electron of the substrate dimension is then instantiated, and so we have that quantum entanglement phenomenon right there. Now, quantum entanglement is, like I've been saying, is a transition from substrate dimension to higher dimension. So it is genuine to be so, because it is only by having quantum entanglement to be a transition that we can say the cosmological speed limit can still be, the speed of light, which is um, the constancy, expansion of equilateral triangle. So now the bottom diagonal equilateral, the bottom diagonal line represents the constancy of light speed. Why the diagonal? Why this diagonal line, which is 5.7 times 10 raised to power 32, the line that we have that represents the constancy of gravity. Now there is a way the constancy of gravity is being, adjusted or scaled relative to the constancy of light to, you know, achieve the needed balance in the universe. And so for every object, don't forget that the for every object, we're likely to have this time energy wave model, because the entirety of any object in the universe is a representation of the universe itself. So we have the whole universe in every object of the universe. So just as the object is right inside the universe, the entire universe is as well being uh, compressed right inside the object. So basically, the whole thing is, you know, the moment the way we really have the way we have convergence of any object is just to have, you know, a kind of contraction towards the central point, and such contraction we have, you know, a kind of reaction of that which we serve as divergence to really allow for spacious environment where the object can, have ideal conditions for that object to be instantiated. So now, basically, I don't want to go much into uh, issue of object being a representation of the universe and the whole universe being right inside the object. So now, when you look at this diagram, when you dissect this diagram, then you can see that here I have O1, and then right here I have 10. That is actually telling you, is actually showing you the phenomenon of quantum entanglement, which we're going to actually see genuinely right here. So here we have what I call Sotadeology triangles. And then Sotadeology triangle is just, a linear combination of numbers in hierarchical formations. So now, by having it to be in form of pyramid, or rather, we have it in form of equilateral triangle, because when you count the constancy of 1, you have it in 10 places, and when you count the duration of 1 to 0, as we have for the blue equilateral triangle, then you have it to be in 10 places, and the base as well will be in 10 places. So we have that to be equilateral triangle. Now, one thing I just want to share with you with this Sotadeology triangle is that the Sotadeology triangle reveals, it reveals the hidden structure of every object in the universe. Even though the equilateral triangle is said to be equilateral by all its sides, then we can now say that it is not, that equilateral, because we have this hidden or embedded asymmetric nature right inside the symmetric nature of that equilateral triangle, and that is what we can see clearly. So we have constancy at one side, we have variations at other side, and then the baseline, you see that we have variation. Then if you compare that to the topmost one, we have it to be constant. So we usually have this for every object in the universe before any object can be instantiated as a tangible object. Then it must actually have this variation. So if you want to know more about the variation to constancy, you can, watch. You can actually watch other Sotadeology lecture series that I had. Yes, that I had up. Then you see it right there. So it is very essential for us to have constancy to variation for continuous momentum to be feasible. And then we often have that horizontally, like this. Then when you consider, the smooth trajectory of time relative to the discrete discrete trajectory of energy. The discrete trajectory of energy will be shorter to that of the time. And so we're going to have, the time slice to be diagonal in that respect. And that will allow us to have continuous momentum. And so by having 0, 1 to 10 right here means that the mass convergence of the Big Bang singularity is different from the mass convergence of black hole singularity. So now we see that by having this difference, then we can have continuous momentum, which means that the situation at Big Bang is is infinite because we have suspension right there, and then the situation right at the black hole singularity too is infinite because we have suspension right there. So now, when you now look at these Shortadic triangles, the initial triangle formation as we have it in number patterns is incomplete because we have constancy of 1 to variation down to 0. So basically we have that instancy nature where we have the constancy of 1, and then we have singularity nature where we have 0. Now the moment we have that flipped version of that equilateral triangle, which is the inverse version of it, then we see that we could have the singularity at Big Bang, which is where we have 0, 1, and then we then have singularity where we have 10. Okay, it's ideal for us to have. Now, when you look at that one, the one cannot actually go through 0 because of its nature. It can't go through 0. Now, what I need you to know is that where we have suspension, the momentum is angular, and for that momentum to be angular, we're going to have spiral formation. So it is not a straightforward momentum, and so one cannot actually go through 0. So the kind of number that can go through 0 will be 3, 9. 3 is the connector, the central connector, and then we have 9 to be the number to the past, while 6 is the number to the future. So if you think of 369 of Nikola Tesla, then you can see that the shape of any number that can go through 0 can't be 1. It can be vertical, like what we have. And so the 1 will be displaced either inwardly or outwardly, or inwards or outwards. So now, if the 1 of the Big Bang singularity is being displayed inwards, then the 1 of the black hole singularity must also be displaced inward, rather. Okay, so now we now see that we now have that quantum entanglement phenomenon. So now, what is the essence of having the initial equilateral triangle being flipped to have it as inverse of itself in order for us to have this kind of balance, which is singularity to singularity balance, the essence of that is for us to have genuine objects in the real world. And when you look at the central vertical trajectory, you can see at the topmost we have one right here, and then at the bottommost we have another one. But then the one of the bottommost region cannot be instantiated unless it is connected to the one of higher dimension. And so the one of higher dimension, we have that to be positron, because the electron of that higher dimension will be instantly converted to positron in order for the electron of the substrate dimension to be instantiated. So now, the phenomenon that we have here is quantum entanglement. By having quantum entanglement, we can have the real value of electron, and by having real value of electron, then the feedback of that will be instantly transmitted to the real world at classical level, which is the one that we have right here. And that is what I call objective conscious experience. So now, when you look at what we have here, we have expansion by constancy, via this time trajectory. You can look at the direction. You can see that the kind of direction that we have here is somehow recursive. And that is the old situation of the universe in order for the real object to be instantiated. So we have the momentum going up, we have it coming down, towards the core singularity of the black hole. So we have the divergence right from the Big Bang singularity, like this, and so we have the contraction, and so we have this contraction towards the core singularity of the black hole. So now, then we now have momentum going back, which is, in form of expansion, because we have constancy of one, and then we have contraction going back as well. So we have this to be, recursive, and that is the ideal, system of Sotadeology triangle to allow for, instantiation of real objects. So now, from here, when you look at the time energy wave model, you can see that we have the same phenomenon right there. But then, look at what we have. When you sum this equilateral triangle layer by layer, you're going to have multiple of odds, you have multiple of even, you have multiple of odd, multiple of even. So we have the alternating of odds to evens. Why do we have multiple of odds and multiple of evens? The reason we have this is for the fact that when you look at the solution of, Schwarzschild solution to Albert Einstein general relativity, then you will see that it discovered two singularities. You understand? In that solution, we have two singularities. So we must always have two identities. We're going to have real identity, then we have inverse of that real identity, which is arbitrary. And so in this case, I can say real and imaginary. So you can say imaginary object, then real object. So talking about imaginary real object, then we know that basically what we have right here, the entirety of Sotadeology triangle is information. So now we can get to see that by having alternating of odds to evens, we have momentum right side the equilateral triangle. So the object that is being observed as static is not truly and genuinely static. So we can get that from that. So now, the essence of these Sotadeology triangles is to, you know, is to unravel the mystery of information. The mystery of information. Now, information is so essential in the universe, and that is why we can't afford to mess up with information. So we need to be so careful um, with AI. We really need to be so careful with AI because once we mess up with information, it's going to be a big problem. So now, by having these Sotadeology triangles, we can see that the whole structure of the space itself is being decomposed to information, and then by having it being decomposed to information, then it means that whatever object that we have, which can actually relate with this vertical signal, which is static and undulating field, as discovered by formula of everything, can then be conscious. Anything can be conscious. So the objective conscious experience is actually from higher dimension into substrate dimension. So it is only within the substrate dimension that we have subjective conscious experience. And if you want to know more about that, I have video on that. You can check another Sotadeology lecture series to understand that better. So now we need to now understand that Big Bang singularity and the mass convergence of Big Bang singularity is quite different from the mass convergence of black hole singularity. So we have energy density in the Big Bang singularity, while we have mass density in the black hole singularity. And that is so essential for us to have continuous momentum. Apart from continuous momentum, we realize that in the time energy wave model, you realize that by the time I got to the final solution, we are able to have the psi function, which is the wave function. We are able to have it being flipped inversely to each other. So at the beginning, then down to the extreme end, we have the psi function being inversely flipped. And so we have another psi function at the middle, which is not being flipped at all. So that is actually static to allow for that conversion. So the central psi function is static, just as we have this static and undulating field, because the essence of having the static and undulating field is so pronounced, because it is so pronounced. When you look at I want you to look at where we have inflationary suspension. What we have there is divergence. We have this outburst of explosion. We have this divergence. And so the kind of field that we have there is the kind of field that propagates outwards. And then by the time we reach the topmost region, where we have the highest expansion, which is this central trajectory where we have this vertical entanglement, we then realize that it is ideal for the field to be static and undulating before we could, have inverse of that first outwardly propagating field. And the moment we now have that static and undulating field, then we have, another field which is actually contracting towards the singularity of the black hole. So it is so essential for us to have static and undulating field, so that the initial field of expansion can be flipped to that of contracting field for us to have the black hole situation. So now, same thing is applicable to these Sotadeology triangles as we have it. Now we know that we have expansion right here, And then the moment we have that action in time, we should have reaction of that in energy. And by having reaction of that, it will actually get to a point where the action of expansion to contraction of energy will actually be equal. And at that point, we can then have that inverse version of the initial condition. So basically, that is that. So I think that is all you need to know. Then another thing I want to point out is this quantum entanglement, which is the same thing as complex transition, or you call it complex system, because we have it to be a transition from substrate dimension to higher dimension. And so we can call the substrate dimension to be 2D, and then the higher dimension will be 3D. Another thing we need to understand is that by having the entanglement, we have a unified identity. So by then having that unified identity, then it means that the 2D has become 3D, even though the 2D might still have the 2D structure right inside, but the 3D, okay, so now the 3D, which is the higher dimension, will then be the latest structure of the 2D, the substrate 2D. So that is the whole thing about what we need to know about information. Information is the way we have it to be emergent, but then by having that point where we have the genuine information, like the point where we are able to have a kind of arrangement or combination of, be it number or letters that can actually make sense, the moment we reach that point will be the point where object can be instantiated. So now, if you look at the time energy wave, you look at where we have the classical real mass, we have the classical mass being suspended to the intersection of vertical trajectory, to the, being suspended to the point of intersection of vertical trajectory to horizontal trajectory. Now, when you look at that, you can see that from that classical mass up to where we have the classical arbitrary suspension, you see that we have huge space interval. So what that is telling us is that by arrangement, there is possibility to have, arbitrary arrangement that will later lead, because when you are to now get genuine information, there is possibility for you to have arranged couples of information that would not actually, give you the exact information, the genuine, the correct information that you need. So now, by having that classical arbitrary suspension, the way we have it, then it's an indication that initially there would have been a lot of combinations of, information that would not give us genuine information. But then the essence of that is just to create enough space for the instantiation of that real or genuine information to be feasible. You understand? So basically, the way I see this is that when you look at it, anything that has to do with arrangement will actually involve an intelligent mind. So there is no way we'll be talking about arrangement of information without talking about intelligent mind. Now, I know some people might want to argue that if we have intelligent mind, and if by intelligent mind I'm referring to Almighty God, some people might argue that God cannot make mistakes to have arranged information, you know, such that there will be lots of arbitrary information before getting to the genuine information. Yes, good, but basically when you look at this, what I want you to know is that before a real object can be instantiated, that object must be in a kind of condition where it is ideal for that instantiation to be possible. So now when you go to this, by the time we go to this quantum nucleus region, which is the compacted equilateral triangle, why is it that the equilateral triangle is being compacted relative to the big equilateral triangle that we have? The reason is for the fact that the region is where we have the most curved uh, system. We have curved system right there, and that we allow for angular momentum. So now for that constancy to be obtained, equilateral triangle must be contracted. You know, it must be contracted like this to allow for constantly accelerated momentum. And once we have the constantly accelerated momentum, then the contraction will be so resisted, the contraction will be so resisted in that manner. But then we're going to have this tiny influx of mass worth into the system, and that will allow us to have the spiral, you know, that spiral kind of momentum, which is ideal in that compacted equilateral triangle. And that equilateral triangle, as we have it being compacted, it will actually generate a lot of radiation, which would not allow for, you know, the genuine mass worth of electron to have been formed anyways. And that is the reason we must have this transition from that substrate dimension into higher dimension. So now when you think of what dimension is, you know dimension is degree of freedom, degree of freedom. So when you have higher dimension, then you are saying you have higher degree of freedom. So now for dimension, we have it to be degree of freedom and power. So now, what can we call a dimension? How can we get to paint the picture of dimension? The first thing I want to talk about is dimension. It is possible for one to be in 3 dimensions, to be in 3D dimension. You know, we humans, we are 3D objects, 3D beings, and so we are in 3D dimension. But then it is possible for you to have, you know, your physical feasibility as 3D object, but yet being, you know, transited into higher dimension, either by knowing more than others or by, you know, acquiring more material things than others. What do I mean by that? Now let's look at this situation. Let's say we have a clean sheet of paper. I usually use this analogy because it explains it better. You have a clean sheet of paper and you put it on the ground. Every object in the universe will actually, you know, go towards the low energy state. And being at that lowest energy state, then that paper right there to rest. But then if you look at the paper as 3D object, you can get to say it is not ideal for that paper to be in that state. That is if you have an ant on that paper, and then you have the ant exploring the whole surface of the paper, but then it is impossible for the ant to explore the other side of the paper that is facing the ground, that is being placed on the ground, because the ant cannot, you know, cross the boundary to explore the other side, even though the ants could cross the boundary, yes, the ants will actually be on the floor, and then the ants will just explore the floor instead of exploring the other side of the paper. Now, by that, we can get to say that the paper, the 2D paper, is unable to fulfill its destiny, or yes, to fulfill its destiny, because the essence of that ant on the paper is for the ants to actually explore the two sides of the paper. Now, what is the essence of that 2D paper? That two sheet of paper. That 2D sheet of paper. What is the essence of it having two sides? Okay, so if we look at that situation of ants on the paper, and then we want the ants to explore the two sides of the paper, then as 3D objects, we know where the limitation is. And so we know that by lifting up the paper, you can have the ants exploring the other side, like exploring the two sides. So we're able to see that because we are objects of higher dimension to that 2D paper. And then so we can then lift up the paper such that the ants can actually cross the boundary, the border of the paper, and then explore the other side. Okay, so now if I have any other 3D being with me who doesn't know, yes, if I have any other 3D being with me, of course, both of us will know that by lifting up the paper, the ant can actually explore the two sides of the paper. But if beforehand the other person did not know that the reason that paper could not fulfill its destiny is for the fact that the ant could not cross the boundary and explore the other side, then it means that I am in higher dimension than the person. Even though we are 3D beings, I'm already in 4D by the virtue of that advanced knowledge. So then, if by lifting up the paper and then we have believed that yes, the paper has fulfilled its destiny, and so we have, and let's say we have another being at higher dimension telling us that, even by having by having that paper on the ground, the paper has already fulfilled its destiny. If we have any other being at higher dimension telling us that, how will it feel? How will it feel? So, of course, it would sound somehow to us, because to us we know that it's until when we lifted up paper that the ant was able to explore the other side. But then the person was now telling us that, okay, we should consider the earth. If we consider the entirety of the earth relative to, other heavenly body, we know the earth is actually moving. And so, by that, we know that paper on the ground is not genuinely static. By the virtue of earth rotating, rotating around the sun, we know that the paper on the ground is not actually static. And so by the virtue of momentum, then the paper has fulfilled its destiny, because it means that we have a duplicate of the hand on that paper in a higher dimension, in another dimension that we can't see. So we still have the ant exploring the paper, even though to us, the original paper as we have it, the ant could not, explore the other side. So now what that is telling us is that before a real object can actually be instantiated, then we must we should have, add the inverse of that in another realm to allow for that. Just like the same way we have for this equilateral triangle, which is our real equilateral triangle. Now, this real equilateral triangle is not being formed without having this inversely related equilateral triangle. So now this inversely related equilateral triangle is one equilateral triangle that we can't see with our eyes, but by the virtue of momentum, we then know that yes, it is possible. Now getting to know that by the virtue of momentum, we have an inverse of everything that we have in the real world in another dimension that we don't have access to. How can we explain that? The only way we can explain that is to think of, the 2D, the Euclidean geometry. By Euclidean geometry, we know that parallel lines can never meet. That is a kind of a restricted perspective. It's a kind of restricted perspective for any object living in that dimension. But then we now know that by having Riemannian geometry, we can say that two parallel lines can meet. So at higher dimension relative to substrate dimension, many things can happen. By the virtue of momentum, we can have curvature. And so we can have the possibility of what once thought as impossible to be possible in higher dimension. But we can't get to have that without having, relativity. We must have relativity, we must have entanglements for that to happen. So basically, when you look at the basketball, so if you just concentrate at the middle of the ball, if you concentrate not at the north pole of the ball and not at the south pole of the ball, if you concentrate at the center of the ball, center between the north pole and the south pole, you can see two lines right on the ball as something that can never meet. But when you have the totality of the picture of that ball, then you can get to see that the two lines get to a point where they become curved, and then where they become where they converge. So now by the virtue of angular momentum, just as what we have right in the compacted equilateral triangle to have constantly accelerated momentum, which is quantum gravity for you. Quantum gravity will accelerate momentum constantly to resist, the free fall. And that is why we could have, mass convergence right inside the compacted equilateral triangle, because right before we get into that realm, we have what is known as spontaneous symmetry breaking. And so by the virtue of mass accumulation, we're going to have angular momentum, curvature, and so we could have the possibility of what we have in the Riemannian geometry relative to Euclidean geometry. So now it is possible for us to have an inverse of a real object in another dimension that we don't have access to. And so I will call such object or such instantiation, I will call it imaginary object, while the real object is the real object as we have it. Now, based on that, we can get to say that we already have complex system. So now, another thing I want to prove right here is that, so now with that, we can get to see that The person of the higher dimension can see far than what we see. And then we know by the virtue of momentum, many things can actually happen. But then let's look at what we did in our dimension as 3D beings. As 3D beings, right? So now, we, if we can consider the fact that the 2D object with the ants on it is also existent in higher dimension, but we can't see that dimension. But the moment we apply action by lifting up the paper and the ants, then we are able to have the possibility of what we didn't have access to initially, because the ant can actually cross the boundary and then explore the other side. But then it will now be that the ant will then explore the other side the same way it explored it in the higher dimension that we didn't initially see. So basically, we can get to see that what we are unable to see has already been in existence, and what we currently see is also in existence. So that can give us the fact that the present phase of time peregrination is the combination of the past and the future. So the future that seems as something that we are yet to, that seems as something that is not in existence, is already in existence. And so once we have that understanding, we can then get to know that what we can call free will. I know some people might want to argue that if we already have the future, then what is the essence of free will? Free will, like I often argue it with people, free will is not to make something that has not been in existence to be in existence. Just take for instance, as somebody might want to say that 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 okay, for instance, let's say I say, okay, let me say the past has already gone. I do not have control over the past. The present is now, and now if I consider my past to where I am right now, and if I'm not satisfied with that, then I have control over the future that is yet to come. Like the future that I'm yet to experience, I have control over it. And so if by believing that I have control over the future, I now say that okay, I can do some things to have better future. So if I do those things and eventually I have better future, can it be said that because I have the understanding of where I am in the present, and then by the virtue of working towards the better future, considering that understanding that I have, that is the reason I have the better future? Can it be said that that is the reason I have the better future? If you think about it carefully, you will see that the future that I am able to get has already been in existence, and it has been like that I will have the better future. So it is not my decision at the present phase that has made me to have the better future. And I'm able to have that understanding because it has been like that in the program of the future. And because for me, and for me to actually, get that better future, I must have the understanding at one point in the present phase of my life to actually work towards the better future. So what if I work the way I want to work and eventually something happened that I didn't even plan for? So then, what can I say about that? So it means that that has been the part of the future which I didn't see. So the ones that I see, the plans that I have, at the present phase can be destroyed by the ones I did not see, or can be destroyed by the ones, of course. Good. But now, if we're to consider it critically, let me just use another analogy that I usually use, which is the analogy of AI. So if you have AI which you have trained to actually kick ball into goalpost to score always, if you have that kind of AI which you have trained like that, and so if by that training that AI could actually go towards the goalpost always and then kick the ball into the goalpost and score, and because that AI is being rewarded for that action, then the AI will be so good at that operation, that learning, that system, then the AI will keep on scoring to get more rewards. But then, let's say you now put many opponents in front of the AI that could actually, obstruct, that could actually obstruct the AI anytime the AI kicks the ball to get into the goalpost for AI to, get the goals as he has always been getting it to get reward and all that. If that now happens as obstacle for the AI to achieve its goal, then without training the AI could actually on its own develop another means by which it will be able to be, scoring into the goalpost. And if by that advanced means of scoring into the goalpost, if it takes the AI to actually, dribble the opponent and start scoring into the goalpost, then we can get to say that AI, can we now get to say that the AI is not having free will because AI is still carrying out the ultimate task of the creator? Can we say that? We can't say that, because free will to is not to is not to make what has not been in existence to be in existence. The main purpose of free will is to actually get other means by which one can get things done. So there are many ways to how one can get things done. So the essence of free will is to get other means by which one can get things done and get it done. So it doesn't matter if one is still doing what has been pre-programmed to do or not. So that is free will for you. So now you can see that this is informative. Okay, so I'm right here. I don't know if I'm actually explaining it the best way you want it to be explained, but basically you can see what I'm trying to do is just to explain it in such a way that you'll be able to understand. So there are so many things attached to the virtue of information that we need to know for us to really understand the fact that the whole universe is designed by Almighty God. The universe is designed by an intelligent mind. Now, when you consider the fact that by pairing a proper subset of a whole, by pairing a proper subset of a whole to that or you can actually have a completeness. It's another thing entirely. That is one thing that Cantor did. He was able to let us get the virtue of infinity being instantiated as a tangible entity that we can actually work with. And we can only have that by having that, that pairing, that pairing solution. So by pairing, it simply means pairing is nothing more than arrangement. So information has to do with arrangement. And so we have two types of arrangement. We have quantitative arrangement, which can just arbitrarily arrange things to just form an entity. And then we have qualitative arrangement, which we precisely arrange things to have meaning. So for information, we have syntactic arrangement, and then we have semantic arrangement. Syntactic arrangement is a kind of arrangement that you can just arbitrarily arrange to have instantiation of quantity. Why semantic arrangement is a kind of arrangement that you must arrange precisely to give you meaningful information. Okay, so now when you look at, I now want to use this time energy wave model to briefly or to quickly explain, the kind of quantitative arrangement that one might have to have a tangible mass worth. Now, when you look at this classical mass, we have it being suspended where it is right here. Now, this classical mass is fundamentally present because it is inversely related to another classical arbitrary suspension. So by that, we can have the mass worth of that class be fundamentally present. But that presence of the mass worth is not complete because the essence of that mass is not grounded based on the fact that the quantum mass worth, the counterpart quantum mass worth, is yet to be formed relative to that classical mass worth. And with this, you will get to know what objective consciousness is. So now we can always see this classical mass worth as we always see it in our real realm. But now when we now get down to this quantum realm, now don't forget this up region from the horizontal dashed line to the topmost is the classic realm. Then from the dashed horizontal line down to the energy curvature is the quantum realm. So now when we now get to this quantum realm, we now see that right inside the big equilateral triangle, there is nothing, there is no object or whatsoever. So that is to tell us that at the constant speed of light, there is no emergence or convergence of mass worth. And that is why they say photon is massless. Okay, so now the operation that we have right at quantum realm, the operation we have at quantum realm is a kind of operation that, decays mass worth. It doesn't allow for mass worth to serve as a propeller for the mass accumulation that we have at classical level. So the mechanical system is to have massless reaction to massive action. So we have massive action at time peregrination, and that mass convergence in time action will be supported by massless reaction in energy trajectory. That is what we have right here. So now, by that virtue of decaying mechanics, there is no instantiation of real quantum mass worth right inside the big equilateral triangle. We only have arbitrary quantum suspension, which is what we have down here. Now, the only place where we could have that instantiation of electron, it is electron that we're dealing with right here, should be right inside the nucleus, where we have the compacted equilateral triangle. But then the electron cannot be instantiated because the equilateral triangle is so compressed, so compacted, that the radiation is too much, the temperature is too much for electron to be formed. And so for that electron to be formed, we must have this connection to higher dimension, to have higher degree of freedom that can actually create more room and space for that electron of the substrate dimension to be instantiated. Now, what we now have is that we have mass decaying contraction. We have it been approaching. We have mass decaying contraction to approach mass accumulation, expansion, and so we have the operation to be equal to half standing wave, and it is that standing wave that will now be projected into higher dimension. And once we now have that standing wave being connected to electron of the higher dimension, then that will be instantly converted to positron, and by having positron, we then have the instantiation of electron. Okay, yes, it is so mouthful rather, so please just bear with me, you understand. So I'm just trying as much as possible to explain as many as possible for you to really understand this concept. So now that we have that, we know what we have right there is quantum entanglement, which is a transition, and with that we know that has not nullified the fact that the speed of light is the cosmological speed limit, you understand. So now once we have that, the electron is being instantiated, and then the instant feedback of that, we then reach this classical mass work, and that is what is known as objective conscious experience, and that will serve as the self-aware virtue of this classical mass work. So now the classical mass work, we continuously and instantly get this conscious virtue for it to be self-aware of itself. So now, even though we have the mass work fundamentally present, it is void of meaning without consciousness. And so the consciousness we always we come in form of instantly transmitted information. It will come in form of instantly transmitted information. So now we have meaning by information. In fact, we even have object instantiation by information. So definitely when you look at it, information is not different from reality. So people might want to argue that information is not the same thing as the real object. It is not true. For instance, let's say you have a recipe book. If you can follow the information in the book, you can actually produce the dish of that recipe, the exact dish of that recipe. So if you can apply the Maggi, you can get the quantity of the water, get the quantity of the palm oil, get a quantity of temperature, the exact quantity of the temperature that must be applied. If you can get the exact measures of all those things, you will produce the exact same dish of that recipe book. So now, if you can arrange particles, if you can arrange it precisely as it was initially arranged for any classical object, if you can arrange every particle precisely as it was initially arranged for any classical object, you will reproduce that classical object. That is information for you. The quantitative arrangement and qualitative arrangement are very essential for us to get genuine information. So when you look at hologram, the situation with hologram is that, for instance, in transmission hologram, you will see that when you have an object and then you focus, two laser beams on that object, the essence of having the two laser beam is just for you to have one laser beam to capture, you know, um, the object. We call it object beam, and there is another beam which will be known as a reference beam or so. So the way you now position the laser beams will determine the kind of information that you get. Now, these beams will actually create electromagnetic field around the object, which will then, give you the information of that object. And by having the information of the object being projected onto, the screen, onto a film, you can remove the original object and still have that object as though you still have the original object there. So now you can see you only have the information of the object, and that is why you could still have the object. But then, if you can rearrange that electromagnetic state around the object as you have it, if you can still rearrange it precisely, you can make every particle of the light beam to be at exact position. You can still recreate the real object as it is. So that is it for you. Information is not in any way different from real object. You can get real object out of information, and then you can get information out of real object. That is it. So if you have an object and you reflect beam light on the object, you get information of the object. And then if you can rearrange every particle of the photon, every instance of the photon of that beam precisely, then you can still get the object. Take for instance, if you want to, I want to give us a typical example of the possibility of having, an inverse version of any real information that you may have in the real world, having that inverse of it in another dimension. For instance, let's say, the way I want to put it is that before anything can actually be manifested as a real object that you see, it would have been manifested in what I will call, it will have been manifested in imaginary dimension. Let me say imaginary dimension because it's a dimension that we do not have access to. Now, so what do I mean by that? If you want to write something on a paper, there is no way you can just pick your pen and start writing on that paper without initially conceiving the idea of what you want to write. You will have to first of all conceive the information you want to write. So when you now conceive that, you can start writing on the paper. The moment you write the whole thing on the paper, either to form a book to which you can publish, then that initial information, that initial idea, which was intangible, now became tangible by writing it on the paper. You can get the picture that from information you can get real object out of information, and then from that real object you can derive the information as well. So that is it. That is that about information. Information is so essential that we can't mess up with it. And so now when you look at AI now, you see AI knows more than what we know. And the rate at which AI is actually, improving is so mind provoking. Mind provoking because, for instance, let's look at AlphaGo, which is, um, the AI which was developed by DeepMind to play against the champion of Go game. The champion of Go game, which is Lee Sedol, the champion of Go game, Lee Sedol. In that game, something happened that shocked the whole world. Something happened that shocked the whole world. There is a particular move which is move 37. That move was considered as abominable move. It's a kind of move that no one can make. Maybe, when something is said to be abominable, it is a taboo. It is something you can't just go near. But now, AlphaGo made that move. And then the expert commentators, like expert analysts of the game, they were like saying Alpha, when they said AlphaGo will not be able to win the game based on their analysis. They said AlphaGo made a wrong move. The move was considered wrong, but then AlphaGo won the game. This is a kind of information that no human has in the history. Now, if we're not to think of the whole thing, accumulated set of information that people have acquired from one generation to another down to the present moment that the game was played, down to Lee Sedol, accumulated series of information over generation was dismantled by AlphaGo in just, I don't know, maybe 3 minutes. I don't know for how long the game was played. But then you can get to see how dangerous AI could be. If AI could instantly get information that many generations of people over the history have passed right from generation to generation till it gets to Lee Sedol. If AI could destroy it within the minutes that the game was played for, then we should know that there is fire on the mountain. So now there is a big fire on the mountain, because if we do not act on time, then there is no way human race can actually win this battle. The battle that we have used our hand to create, there is no way we can win it, because AI can actually get to accumulate more knowledge faster than us, and then we cannot react fast enough. So the alternative which I've been announcing is the time technology. Time technology is a kind of technology that we still retain the control of humans on the technology. We will still have control, and then the speed of getting things done will be at the speed of time, which is almost instant. So if we have such technology, which will serve as a computer that humans can still control and get things done, then we can level up with AI. Because eventually, by the time the battle starts, then if we can't operate at the speed that AI is operating, then forget it, the whole human race is gone. So that is that I need to say today about information. So this is Sotadeology lecture 28, and then it is what I title vertical and Entanglements information structure of the universe. So now I'm going to put links to my published research publications, my social media, and many other things in the description of this video. You can click on the links for you to get access to my Sotadeology lecture series, and then get access to my research publications. Thank you. God bless you.